Would you believe me if I told you that most diseases start in the mind, not the body? And that applies to anything from heart disease to digestive issues to lung disease, liver disease, mental health disease, you name it. The truth is that stress is the silent root for many of our problems, and most of us have been living in it since childhood. Welcome back to the Good Gut Feeling podcast, where we digest modern medicine with old world wisdom. I'm Alexandra Shestina, your host for this weekly podcast. And today I'm so excited to talk about the hidden epidemic. It's literally the cause of every single condition that I see in my practice, at least to some degree. In fact, most of the time, it is the driving cause. And so many of us have neglected that aspect of our health and focus on what's downstream, on the inflammation, on the problem, on the symptoms. And we try to deal with it only in a physical way. And sometimes it's good with the right food and the right supplements. But if we don't address this hidden driving force, then we may never, ever get to the true root and really heal from the inside out in a lasting way. This may be one of the reasons why we never really cure chronic disease. When you go to the doctor, you often ask for blood tests or scans or different types of physical tests to look for the root cause. But the true root cause begins with your nervous system. We have a beautiful response in our body to threats. It's called the sympathetic nervous system. So when we feel a threat, whether it's a physical threat or emotional threat or something that is perceived as scary or dangerous or harmful to the body, we respond, and we respond appropriately. Our heart starts to race. Our blood goes to our limbs, to our hands or feet or legs. Our breathing rate increases. So we are prepared to run, to take action. And that is the normal response. But when that system never turns off, this becomes toxic. This is something that I have seen for years in my practice. And guess what? There's a lot of evidence. What happens when we're chronically hypervigilant? The body secretes all kinds of stress hormones and neurotransmitters that are appropriate in the short term, like adrenaline, like cortisol. But guess what? In the long term, they create inflammation. So stress, long term, creates inflammation. Inflammation is the foundation for all disease. Heart disease, lung disease, gastrointestinal disease. Inflammation is where disease begins. So when we say stress causes disease, it's not a metaphor. There's actually biological evidence to show exactly how stress causes inflammation in the body. Not only inflammation in your body, but guess what? Stress can also affect your DNA. And it can cause modifications in your DNA called epigenetic modifications, meaning after genetics, and it can change how your genes are expressed. So you may be saying, well, I'm not stressed. My life is good. Like I had some bad experiences in the past, but now like everything's good. So I don't know why I would be experiencing this. But guess what? Many of us aren't just reacting to the stress that is happening in our lives today. We're actually still experiencing our childhood stress, our childhood traumas. We are reliving old stress from childhood. And if you are experiencing like anxiety or stress or reactiveness or conflict, and you don't even know where it's coming from, it's likely coming from an adapted response from your childhood. Because guess what happens? When we have stress in childhood, and it doesn't have to be terrible, by the way, sometimes it's micro stressors. Sometimes it's things like I didn't belong, I didn't have a lot of friends, the teachers didn't believe in me, I thought I was stupid, tremendous pressure from my parents. All those things are not horrible per se. It's not abuse, it's not neglect, but those kind of experiences can create immediate stress. And then that stress gets stored and we develop defense mechanisms. And often those defense mechanisms are hypervigilance. What is a hypervigilant nervous system? It is an alarm that is permanently on even when there's no danger. And that can be an adapted mechanism that we learned in childhood. Because what happens in childhood? We don't have the intellectual capacity to give a situation meaning. So perhaps now you interact with someone who's not nice to you, but you're grown up and you can say, well, this person is maybe not meaningful in my life, or maybe this person is having a bad day, or maybe this person is struggling. And because you're able to do that, it may not affect you as much internally. But guess what happens when you're a child? You're not able to do that. And even though we may not even have a conscious memory of it, it gets internalized into our subconscious mind. And then we live in a reality of defense. And the defense is hypervigilance, because if something is scary, if I perceive that something might be scary, I'm always going to be on alert. I'm always going to be on alert looking for something. And that is a revved up sympathetic response that can create disease in the long run. What's the evidence of that? Well, I can tell you that in my practice, I see this with almost all my patients. But there's studies done. And one interesting study called the ACE study, it's done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. Basically, they looked at adults and they calculated their ACE scores. And ACE is an adverse childhood experience. And that was based on multiple factors. And they were pretty bad. So things like abuse, neglect, mental illness in the family, but even things like divorce, which is probably at this point like what 50% of us have experienced in life, including myself. So children who were either abused, neglected, had parents that had mental illness or parents that were divorced, they had certain scores. The higher the adverse experience, the higher the score. And guess what? That correlated with their health as adults. So not only mental health, like you could imagine. Yeah, it definitely correlated with depression and substance abuse, but it correlated with heart disease. So adults who had a higher ACE score had 2 times the risk of heart disease and 3 times the risk of lung disease compared to those who didn't have elevated adverse child experience scores. So in essence, the child experienced something stressful. Their nervous system shot up. But then when it kind of went to baseline, it didn't go back to 0. It kind of stayed at a low level that always stayed with them. So it took less to stimulate them. In essence, the nervous system of someone who had this negative experience doesn't fully downshift. It always stays a little bit heightened and sensitized. And that creates hypervigilance and inflammation in the body years later. So you may think, okay, everything's great now, but it could be something that happened when you're 5 or even 2 or 1 or even at an age that you don't remember. Another famous study that looked at telomere length. Telomeres are like caps on our chromosomes that protect our chromosomes. And the length of the telomere is associated with health and longevity. And when those shorten, that is considered aging. So they took women, premenopausal women, ages 20 to 50, and they looked at them and they scored them based on how much stress they have in their life. They in particular looked at if their children were healthy or sick. And then they looked at the telomere length as well as the oxidative stress in their body. And guess what? These women who had higher stress levels had shorter telomeres, more oxidative stress, predicting that there will be disease later on, or even predicting that they may live a shorter lifespan. And it was calculated to be about 10 years. Even if your childhood was peaceful, modern technology, modern life is designed to keep our nervous system active. So even when things are good, but we're constantly in front of screens, we're constantly in front of blue light, we're constantly hearing so much stressful information because let's face it, when we turn on the news or hear any news, it's usually sensationalized, it's usually negative, and it's often extremely stressful, especially now. Especially this has really been revved up since 2020, or where there's been so much more instability in the world, from pandemics to wars to economic instability. And it's all in front of us, staring and glaring constantly. And not only that, even let's say you're on Instagram and you're not really looking at the news, but you're kind of looking at fashion or maybe wellness. Just that constant changing, that light changing, and the blue light itself is stressful. It creates an increased sympathetic response. So even if everything's great, the way that we're designed with modern technology creates stress. And even how we work, we're multitasking. We have so much going on. We can't even just be present most of the time. Most of the time our phone is ringing, people are calling us, people are needing us. Many of us don't even have time to disconnect. So the body never even gets to parasympathetic mode. And guess what? Parasympathetic mode is when our vagal innervation goes up. That's when we're calm. And that's actually when our food is digested in the best way. So when we are eating in a sympathetic mode, which most of us are, especially if we're talking about stressful things, especially if we're at work, especially if we're sitting in front of screens while we're eating, our food is not digested the same way. So you could take 2 meals, identical, and you eat one in a stressful state and one in a calm state. Guess what? The food is going to be digested better when you're calm. If we look at autoimmune disease, we all have heard that autoimmune disease has some genetic component. And yes, that's true. And sometimes it runs in families. And sometimes when one person has one autoimmune disease, they're higher risk for others. We see that all the time in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. But guess what? No one is born with it. All these people that have genetic predispositions to Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, there's not one that I've ever seen or heard of that was born with it. In fact, sometimes it comes on earlier in life. Sometimes it comes on later. But it always comes on at some point after birth. So it's not purely genetic, like most genetic diseases most genetic diseases are not purely genetic. So what triggers that response? What causes the onset of the disease? Most doctors don't even have time to really get into it. But when I speak to my patients and I speak to them about their childhood, about their past, about what was happening before their disease came on, the majority had a preceding stressful life event. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not the only one that sees that because it's already being spoken about in IBD conferences. And I'm not talking about functional medicine doctors. I'm talking about some of the top academic gastroenterologists are already noticing this. The problem is that the Western medical model has not addressed it. So what do? We treat the downstream physical effects with anti-inflammatory medications or immunosuppressive medications. And in functional medicine, we use supplements, but it's still the same pill for an ill downstream approach to health where the root is somewhere else. And yes, supplements are good and diet is absolutely critical. But if we don't touch that major factor that cause the onset and often can cause flares, we will always be behind the 8 ball. Now, here's the good part. You're not doomed. Even if you had a horrible childhood, even if life has been so incredibly stressful, you are not doomed. In fact, our bodies are so resilient and we have an amazing ability to heal even these horrible, awful, stressful events. We may not be able to reverse them. We may not be able to make them not happen. But you know what? What we can do is we can decrease and eliminate their effects in our lives. The same mind-body connection that can cause disease can cause healing. So if you are affected by something that happened in your life, an experience, a stress, a fear, well, guess what? You can use the power of your mind that created that to heal it. How could we do it? Well, the good news is there's a lot you can do. The bad news is it takes time. And it's not as easy as taking a pill. And this is often why people neglect it. So what can you do? Meditation is an unbelievable tool to increase the vagal response, to take down hypervigilance and really balance the nervous system. Now, you may not know how to meditate. And I will tell you that some people who just start, they get discouraged because, okay, they do 5 minutes and then they get bored and their mind starts to wander and they don't really feel a result because there probably isn't much of a result with 5 minutes when you really don't know how to do it. But it's practice. And just like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get. If you can focus for 1 minute, then increase it to 2 minutes and then increase it to 3 minutes. And you don't have to go from 1 minute to an hour. And if you can't meditate for 20 minutes because you can't focus, it doesn't mean you can't get there in a month. So yes, it does take time, but the results can be magical. But you know what's even much easier is breathing. We all know how to breathe and most of us do it wrong. So how do you breathe? You can just do something so simple. Slow and complete inhales and slow and complete exhales. You can do it from in your nose and out of your nose. You could do in your nose and out of your mouth. You could do it through different counts, 3 seconds in, 5 seconds out, hold it in between. There's so many beautiful ways to use the breath. In fact, there are so many physical tools that involve the breath. Physical tools like yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong. In fact, when we use the breath for physical movements, the movements are so much more powerful. It not only makes you strong, it not only increases your cardiovascular ability, but it also takes down the hypervigilance. It creates balance. It can increase the vagal response and create a calm experience, even if you don't sweat so hard, even if you don't do it for hours. Just being mindful and including the breath can escalate the physical activity to the next level. Another free, easy tool that we can all use to balance our nervous system is nature. So if you live in New York City, you are a little bit more limited, but you can go to Central Park and you can go to the East River, and it's a little more work, but you know what? Creating space and time for that, either daily, weekly, or as often as you can, but integrating that into your day as just something, not as something special, not as a reward because you finished your work on time, but as a priority. You know, when we do that, even 10, 15, 20 minutes, it can create magic. Walking on the soil. So there's something called grounding. I love talking about it because it's so easy. You just stand or sit or walk. And it's better if it's on natural soil or sand, like a natural ground. And if you can walk on it, great. If you can't, you can just sit and have your feet grounded. These are just some of the things that you can do at home. And there's so many techniques that we can use to help you. In my practice, I use energy medicine, visceral manipulation, cranial osteopathy. There's so many beautiful techniques out there to balance the nervous system. It's such an integral part of traditional methods. In fact, if you look at almost any traditional model, what creates health is balance. And balance is not only in the physical organs, because the physical organs are so related to our emotional state. So according to traditional Chinese medicine, according to Ayurveda, we store our emotions in our organs. And our bodily responses, the functions of the organs, are so related to how we store those emotions on a cellular level. So stress, emotions, an imbalanced nervous system, hypervigilance, those are not separate from physical health. In fact, they are the root causes of physical health. And even the microbiome. I look at the microbiome as an interface. Everything gets encoded in the microbiome, but it's not really the root cause. What you eat, the medications you take, the thoughts you have, your relationships, all of that change your microbiome. They're encoded in your microbiome. So yes, when you're stressed, your microbiome gets affected in a physical way. And we can see that. We can see that in terms of diversity. The microbiome can experience less diversity, which is a sign of microbiome health. It can experience an overgrowth or bugs that we really don't want. If you take one message from this episode, let it be this. Stress is not just an emotion. It is a physiological state that shapes your health. The good news is that your body's not broken. It is adaptive. And if it adapted to protecting you with hypervigilance, it can adapt to safety. So with awareness, non-judgment, because all the things that we're feeling, they're not bad. They're protective mechanisms that we don't need anymore. Using that, you can reprogram your nervous system for calm, balance, and health. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Good Gut Feeling. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, share with a friend, turn on the notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can find a whole lot more on wholegut.com. Stay healthy, stay gutsy, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.